I think we're going to leave open questions for perhaps after we get our panel started, so I'm not going to take questions right now. But perhaps I'll just take a quick break and convene our panel and then move on to the next bit.
Please, while we're bringing the panel up, let's have a round of applause. Why don't you take a second mic there? Sure. And here's your, I'll tell you what, I'll trade you even.
Great.
I'll just stop standing.
Oh, it's a present.
Very good.
Remote of some sort.
All right, very good. What I'd like to do is we'll have questions at the end, and I'll leave enough time for that, so all of you can satisfy your curiosity with questions for the panel. Some of our panelists will, in fact, afterwards be able to remain and have some one-on-one conversations with you as well. But what I'd like to do very quickly is to recognize our panelists and to help you understand the diversity of the panel that we have here. I'll then go through and give each of the panelists a couple of minutes to describe not only their background but also their companies to put it even more in context. But starting from my right here, our panelist Paul Eshaw is with Alcentra Mezzanine Partners. They're a middle market mezzanine lending fund. Then Gary Matthews is a managing director and operating partner with Morgan Stanley Private Equity, which is a large upper middle market private equity fund. And Dan Negrea is a co-founder and principal of MTN Capital Partners, which is an independent sponsor and therefore operates without a fund. So very different corporate structures here, but all of whom use independent directors on their operating companies. So Paul, why don't you start off and give us some background on Alcentra and some background on yourself.
Sure. So I manage Alcentra's junior capital fund and capabilities. Alcentra is one of 18 subsidiaries, asset management firms that are owned by BNY Mellon. We manage approximately $21 billion. Largely CLOs, high yield, and about $2 billion is junior capital, whether it's here in the U.S. or in Europe. I'm here on the panel as a mezzanine fund because we invest in privately owned companies that are non-sponsored backed or they're backed by unfunded sponsors. And where we own anywhere from 15 to 25% of the equity in these businesses, we typically have the right to name a board member, and that's when we reach out and bring in an independent director to serve in that capacity. Right now we're managing about $300 million under management.
Very good.
Good morning, Gary Matthews, Morgan Stanley Private Equity. So we've got about $1.5 billion fund, I guess one of 300 in the country. And it's a classic private equity fund. A little bit of the money is from Morgan Stanley. The vast majority is from outside investors and typical pension funds and sovereign wealth funds. It's our fifth fund. We've been in the business, 25 years or so. This fund has 12 companies in the portfolio. I've been with Morgan Stanley now about 6.5 years. Prior to that, actually ran 3 different private equity-backed companies for different sponsors, not Morgan Stanley, and have gotten into the money side of the business the last few years.
Good morning. My name is Dan Negrea. I'm managing partner of MTN Capital Partners. Before I talk about MTN, I would like to first thank Bobby Blumenfeld and Lou Holstead for organizing this event. ACG is an institution in the middle market in New York and nationally, and they're doing a great job. Also would like to thank Tate for organizing this panel. I've been on many panels and I've also moderated a few. This is the best organized panel I've ever been to. For the record, this is the list of who speaks when. We are,
Right, broken down in minutes.
it's broken down by minutes, and if you are number 1, you talk 4 minutes, you have number 2, you talk 2 minutes, if you're number 3, it's 1 minute, and then you, I mean, I've never been, I will frame this, keep it in my office, it will be the standard for,
You've got 5 seconds left.
I think you'll put something to vibrate in my chair. MTN has been in business for 10 years. In these 10 years, we've done 14 transactions, platforms, and add-ons, totaling $500 million. We are different from other private equity firms in 2 major respects. Number 1, we are a fundless sponsor, or the more dignified term these days, an independent sponsor. So this means we do not have a committed fund, and every time we do a transaction, we team up with somebody. We've teamed up with a variety of firms. With some of them, we've done more than 1 transaction. And since we are in New York, our claim to fame is we bought King Supermarkets and subsequently Balducci's in partnership with Angelo Gordon. The other way in which we are different, so we are a firm of 9 people. The other way in which we are different is that we use what we call industry experts in every single one of the transactions that we are doing. And I will talk about it more later, but we use them from the beginning, from the due diligence stage, to the point where after the acquisition they either join the board or they join the management of the company.
Very good. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tate Purcell. I'm one of the founders and a principal of another independent sponsor called Unlimited Horizons. We two have been operating for 10 years, and we have 3 partners. Currently have 1 operating company. We focus on the lower middle market, manufacturing and distribution companies, and we tend to focus on scratch and dents. Companies that are a little bit troubled, that we can provide the kind of operating expertise that we have to increase the value after we bought them. I also serve on a couple of boards of private manufacturing companies, and so I guess as we're talking about independent partners, or independent board members, I are one. Anyway, let me start off with the first question, and we've heard Joe's view as to what independent directors bring to the party, but I'd like to get some specific thoughts from each of the panelists as to why you bring independent directors onto your boards. Paul, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So, as I explained earlier, we are typically a minority investor. So owning anywhere from 15 to 25% of the business, and we feel that warrants a seat at the board. We also have a focus on certain verticals like healthcare, pharmaceutical services, government services, business services. A lot of those industries are under heavy regulatory scrutiny, and so by having an independent board member, it really frees us up. Not necessarily from portfolio monitoring, because we still do that aggressively and have a fiduciary duty to do that. There are just so many intricate details in the industries that we invest in that to bring an operating executive to the table who has lived that and breathed that just gives us a sense of comfort that the people that are minding the store have a level, a depth of knowledge that we would never be able to replicate. Okay, and the other area where we bring in independent directors is as a mezz fund. There are times where we don't get it right, and the good thing about being a mezz fund is one way to deleverage the company is just to convert your debt into equity, where we then become the control investor effectively. And that's where we will probably expand the number of independent directors beyond just 1. We will still be in control of the board, but we will typically bring in 2 independent directors, again, helping to drive strategy and bring a level of insight to the operations of the company that we just won't have.
Very good. Gary, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, let me build on Paul's and Joe's points a little bit from earlier this morning, and think for a second about why at least private equity firms want to have boards, right? Because we're not public companies, and while there's some governance obligations, it's a far cry less than in a public company. And we talk to our portfolio companies. I talk to our CEOs, once or twice a week. So it's not like a public board where that's your only interaction with management. The reason we have boards is so once a quarter or a couple of times a year, you step back and think about what's going on in the business and look at the quarterly numbers and go to work on the strategy or your annual plan and see what progress you're making, see what things are around the corner that may be influencing a business performance, deal with the issues or crises that may be facing a business. So, to start with, it's very different than a public board, and I've served on several public boards. We have daily interaction. So bringing outside directors into a private equity, from a private equity point of view, to a board, to me, really, there are three reasons, at least in our context when we have operating partners around. Number one has been referenced, there's some industry expertise. As good as any operating partner or deal partner might be, you're never an expert in any given business. So I spent a lot of my career in consumer and retail, but given whatever consumer product company we own, I may not have expertise in that field anyway. So there's a certain amount of industry expertise that you love to be able to tap on a couple of times a year. Secondly, as much as we think we know it all, we don't. And having somebody come in who knows the industry, knows the space, a couple times a year, and look at the business performance and the direction and the strategy with his or her ear to the ground outside, brings an objective, independent view. And one of the best things we get out of independent directors is a view of the business, both external, because we can all get sort of focused in the middle of the forest, an external view of what's going on in the world and how competition is reacting, and bring in thoughts outside of what we deal with management day in and day out. And then thirdly are connections. All right, at the end of the day, operating partners and deal people don't know everybody in the world, and whether it's connections to source more deals, whether it's connections to find great other industry executives, vendors, consultants, whatever, the Rolodex of an independent director is also quite important. So, to me, I look at it, Tate, and say, it's the industry expertise, right, the independent view, and the Rolodex as much as anything from our standpoint.
Very good. Dan?
Two things. Obviously, private equity is in the business of creating shareholder value. Okay, so we have independent directors, or as we think about them as MTN Capital, as industry experts, to help us enhance shareholder value. But I would like to add a little bit of historical perspective as to how we got here, and then introduce a point that I think is valuable in terms of where we are at MTN on our use of industry experts. If you think of the private equity business that we have today, it's really an outgrowth, what used to be the leverage buyout business, which started in the late 70s and then became much stronger in the 80s. And you remember the expression, the leverage buyout artists, or the LBO artists, who basically did only one thing, which was buy a company with a lot of leverage. So the contribution of the equity sponsor early on in this industry was to find a good business with predictable cash flow and a lot of free cash flow, put up only about 10% equity, leverage it a lot, pay down the debt with the free cash flow, and then have a valuable company, free and clear after some period of time. And for a while it worked because there wasn't a lot of competition. And then Drexel took it to the next step by using junk bonds to do this. After Drexel's demise, the equity required was much higher. And now the LBO artists couldn't just do financial engineering. So now they became more PE firms. And what was their contribution? Quote unquote, they professionalized the firm. And they would do things such as bring in a CFO, introduce ERP. And that was fine for a while. But the market became more and more competitive. So then it became necessary to do something else, something new. And what was that new thing that they came up with to find the quote unquote operating partners? And that has been fine for a while, which these are people who actually ran something as opposed to private equity guys who are traditionally ex-investment bankers. We at MTN are doing something where we think we are in the forefront of what is going on, which is to use not generalist operating partners, but specialists. We have a database with 5,000 industry experts. So when we have a transaction, we get industry experts involved early on in the due diligence process. But what we are looking for, if we have a distribution company in aerospace, we are not looking for somebody who is a distribution professional, ex-distribution professional, or even a distribution professional in aerospace. But if we have a company which is aerospace distribution of fasteners, we will find somebody who is aerospace distribution of fasteners, that precise and that narrow. So I think we need them because of their high value added, but we need them in a very specialized niche knowledge capacity.